The Zephyrian warship, Dominator, cut through the void like a blade through silk, its massive hull gleaming under the distant light of 3 alien suns. Commander Vexhai stood on the bridge, his 4 arms crossed behind his back as he surveyed the tactical display. The human colony ship they had been hunting for 3 standard cycles was finally within their grasp. "Target acquired, Commander," reported Navigation Officer Krilton, her mandibles clicking with satisfaction. "The vessel appears to be a refugee transport. Minimal defensive capabilities detected." Vexhai's compound eyes glittered with predatory satisfaction. The Galactic Consortium had been clear in their orders. Capture any human vessel attempting to flee beyond the quarantine zone. The humans had proven themselves too dangerous to be allowed free movement through civilized space. Their unpredictable nature and violent tendencies made them a threat to every peaceful species in the galaxy. "Excellent. Deploy the capture net and prepare boarding parties," Vexhai commanded. "Remember, we need prisoners alive for interrogation. The consortium wants to understand their escape routes and hidden colonies." The human ship, a battered civilian transport called New Hope, tried desperately to evade capture. Its engines flared bright blue as it attempted to reach the safety of a nearby asteroid field. But the Zephyrian vessel was too fast, too advanced. Within minutes, the energy net had enveloped the human ship, disabling its engines and communications. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the New Hope, watching helplessly as alien warriors in powered armor cut through her ship's hull. Around her, the crew prepared for the worst. They had all heard the stories of what happened to humans captured by the consortium forces. Interrogation, imprisonment, and eventual execution were the standard procedure. "Captain, they're through the outer hull," reported her first officer, Lieutenant Marcus Webb. "Engineering reports they've cut power to the weapon systems." Sarah nodded grimly. The New Hope carried no weapons worth mentioning anyway. It was a civilian vessel, packed with families fleeing the destruction of Earth's outer colonies. 300 souls, including children, now faced an uncertain fate. The airlock hissed open, and Zephyrian soldiers poured through. Their insectoid features were hidden behind reflective visors, but their body language spoke of confident superiority. They moved with military precision, stunning any human who offered resistance. Among the passengers being herded into the cargo bay, one figure moved differently from the rest. While others cowered or wept, this man remained perfectly calm. He was unremarkable in appearance, medium height, brown hair streaked with gray, wearing simple civilian clothes. But something in his eyes made even hardened Zephyrian warriors pause for a moment before moving on. His name was David Kane, and he had been traveling under an assumed identity. The passenger manifest listed him as a mining engineer from Kepler Station, fleeing like so many others from the consortium's relentless expansion. But the truth was far more complex. Kane watched the aliens with professional interest, cataloging their weapons, armor, and tactical formations. Old habits died hard, even after 5 years of trying to live as a normal civilian. He had hoped those days were behind him, that he could simply disappear into the crowd of refugees and find peace on some distant world. Commander Vexhai personally supervised the loading of prisoners onto his ship. The humans would be taken to the consortium's primary interrogation facility on Nexus Prime, where expert questioners would extract every useful piece of information from their minds before disposing of them. "How many prisoners total?" Vexhai asked his security chief. 287, Commander. The others were eliminated during capture when they attempted to resist. Vexhai nodded approvingly. The consortium had learned that showing mercy to humans was a mistake. They bred like parasites and fought like cornered predators when threatened. Better to cull their numbers whenever possible. As the prisoners were processed through the ship's detention center, a young Zephyrian intelligence officer named Subcommander Tixara was reviewing their identities against the consortium database. Most were exactly what they appeared to be: refugees, farmers, merchants, and their families. But one file made her freeze. The biometric scan of prisoner designation, BER-247, had triggered a deep system alert. Cross-referencing with classified military databases revealed an identity that made Tixara's antennae twitch with shock. She quickly sealed her workstation and hurried to Commander Vexhi's quarters. The information she carried was too sensitive to transmit through normal channels. "Commander, I must speak with you privately," she said, her usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. Vexhi looked up from his meal, annoyed at the interruption. "This better be important, Sub-Commander." "Sir, one of the prisoners. His identity scan triggered a Level Alpha security alert. I've never seen anything like it before." She activated her portable display and showed him the file. Vexhi's compound eyes widened as he read the classification levels and security warnings scrolling past. "This cannot be correct," he muttered. "Run the scan again." "I've run it 14 times, sir. Biometric match is 99.8%. DNA analysis confirms it. We have captured David Kane." The name hung in the air like a death sentence. Every military officer in the consortium knew that name, though few had ever seen the classified files detailing his activities during the human consortium border wars. "The Reaper," Vexhi whispered. Tixara nodded solemnly. "What are your orders, Commander?" Vexhi stood slowly, his mind racing. David Kane, known throughout consortium military circles as the Reaper, was believed dead for over 5 years. The human who had single-handedly destroyed 3 consortium battle groups, assassinated 2 sector governors, and vanished like smoke whenever pursuit grew too close. "Double the guard on the detention level immediately," Vexhi ordered. "Triple security protocols, and send an encrypted message to Consortium High Command. Tell them we have captured the most dangerous human who ever lived." As the hours passed, word of Kane's capture spread through the ship's crew like wildfire. Veterans of the border wars stared at surveillance feeds, unable to believe that the legendary human killer was sitting quietly in a detention cell, looking like any other middle-aged refugee. But in his cell, David Kane sat perfectly still, his eyes closed as if in meditation. He had known this day would come eventually. The consortium's reach was too vast, their surveillance network too comprehensive. A man with his history could only hide for so long. He thought of the passengers from the New Hope, innocent people whose only crime was seeking freedom from consortium oppression. They would suffer because of his presence among them. The thought filled him with a familiar cold anger that he had tried for years to suppress. The ship's lights dimmed to simulate night cycle, but Kane remained awake. Tomorrow they would reach Nexus Prime, and his long exile would end. But he was no longer the same man who had earned the name Reaper through blood and shadow. 5 years of peace had changed him, given him perspective on the cost of violence. Yet as he heard the frightened whispers of children in nearby cells, he felt something stirring within him that had nothing to do with his old professional skills. It was simpler and more dangerous than tactical expertise or combat training. It was righteous fury. The galaxy had forgotten what humans could do when pushed too far. They had grown comfortable thinking of humanity as contained, controlled, and broken. Commander Vexhi and his crew were about to receive a reminder of why their ancestors had feared the darkness between the stars. David Kane opened his eyes, and for just a moment, they reflected the distant starlight like those of a predator awakening from a long sleep. The Dominator arrived at Nexus Prime 18 hours ahead of schedule, its crew eager to transfer their dangerous cargo to the maximum security facility that orbited the fortress world. The space station was a marvel of consortium engineering, a massive structure capable of holding 50,000 prisoners and defended by enough firepower to sterilize a planet. Warden Carthex, a massive Bruthan with scales like armor plating, reviewed the prisoner manifest with growing unease. His security briefing had been classified at the highest levels, and the name David Kane appeared in red lettering across every page. The human known as the Reaper was to be held in absolute isolation until Grand Inquisitor Velthar could personally oversee his interrogation. Status report on Cell Block Omega, Carthex rumbled to his chief of security, a veteran Zephyrian named Colonel Hixmar. All preparations complete, Warden. The isolation chamber has been reinforced with quantum-locked barriers. Neural dampening fields are active, and the cell is under constant surveillance by our best security teams. Nothing gets in or out without our knowledge. Carthex nodded, though his unease remained. He had served in the border wars as a young soldier and remembered the fear that gripped entire fleets when reports came of Reaper attacks, ships found drifting with their entire crew dead, their hulls marked with a simple symbol, a human skull with a scythe. The human had been a ghost story made real, a nightmare that struck without warning and vanished without trace. The transfer proceeded smoothly. The human refugees were processed and assigned to standard holding cells, while David Kane was placed under maximum security escort. He offered no resistance, as 6 guards in powered armor led him through the station's corridors to his special cell. Kane observed everything during the journey: security checkpoints, guard rotations, camera placements, and structural weak points. His mind automatically cataloged possible escape routes and defensive positions, old habits engaging despite his desire to leave that life behind. The isolation cell was a masterpiece of paranoid engineering. Energy barriers, gravity manipulation fields, and constant monitoring made escape seem impossible. But Kane wasn't thinking about escape yet. He was thinking about the children he had heard crying in the ship's detention cells, about families torn apart by an empire that saw humans as nothing more than dangerous animals to be caged. Grand Inquisitor Velthar arrived 3 days later aboard his personal dreadnought, Retribution. The ancient Nexarian was legendary for his ability to break the minds of even the strongest prisoners. His psychic abilities, enhanced by cybernetic implants, could tear thoughts directly from unwilling minds. Velthar's first action was to review Kane's psychological profile, pieced together from scattered intelligence reports and surviving witness accounts. What he found disturbed him more than he cared to admit. "This human is not a simple killer," he told Warden Carthex as they stood before the isolation cell's monitoring station. His actions during the war showed strategic thinking beyond normal human capacity. He targeted key infrastructure and leadership figures with surgical precision. Every attack served a larger purpose. Through the cell's transparent barriers, they could see Kane sitting calmly on his bunk, apparently reading a book provided by the station's limited recreational program. He looked utterly ordinary, nothing like the monster described in classified reports. Perhaps the reports were exaggerated, Carthex suggested. Humans have a tendency toward mythology. Maybe this Reaper was simply in the right place at the right time, and legend grew around coincidental events. Velthar's 4 eyes fixed on the warden with cold intensity. "I lost 3 of my finest interrogators to this human during the war. He killed them not with weapons, but with words. Psychological manipulation so precise it drove them to madness. No, Warden, the reports were not exaggerated." Meanwhile, in the general population cells, word of Kane's identity had begun to spread among the human prisoners. Captain Sarah Chen found herself regarded with new respect when inmates learned that the legendary Reaper had been aboard her ship. Hope began to kindle in places where despair had taken root. "Is it really him?" asked Marcus Webb during one of their brief exercise periods. I heard the Reaper was 10 feet tall and could kill with a look. Sarah glanced toward the maximum security section of the station. It's him. I didn't recognize him at first, but I should have. The way he moved, the way he watched everything. He was evaluating the ship's defenses from the moment he came aboard. Then maybe we have a chance, whispered another prisoner, an elderly woman named Dr. Elena Vasquez. Maybe someone can finally make these bastards pay for what they've done to our people. But Kane wasn't planning escape or revenge. For the first time in 5 years, he was exactly where he belonged, in a cage, separated from innocent people who might be hurt by his presence. The consortium could study him, interrogate him, even execute him. As long as they left the other prisoners alone, he could accept his fate. That calculation changed when Grand Inquisitor Velthar made his first serious mistake. During routine interrogation sessions with the general population, several prisoners mentioned Kane's presence aboard their ship. Velthar, seeking leverage for his upcoming session with the Reaper, decided to conduct a demonstration of what happened to humans who harbored terrorists. He selected a family at random, a man named Thomas Chen, his wife Maria, and their 8-year-old daughter Lucy. They were brought to a special interrogation chamber where Velthar used his psychic abilities to torture information from their minds about Kane's behavior during the journey. The screams echoed through the station's ventilation system, reaching even the isolation cells. Kane sat up on his bunk as the sound of a child's terrified crying penetrated the walls around him. His hands slowly clenched into fists, and for the first time in years, he felt the familiar cold rage beginning to build. When silence finally returned, Kane called for a guard. The Zephyrian warrior who responded found himself facing a completely transformed prisoner. Gone was the quiet, cooperative captive. In his place stood something that made the alien's survival instincts scream warnings. "I want to speak with your Grand Inquisitor," Kane said, his voice perfectly calm despite the murder in his eyes. "The Inquisitor will summon you when ready, human." Kane smiled, and the guard actually stepped backward, despite the energy barriers between them. "Tell Velthar that the Reaper wants to negotiate. Tell him I have information about human resistance movements that could save the consortium millions of lives. But if he hurts one more innocent person, I will make what happened during the border wars look like a gentle summer rain." The guard fled, leaving Kane alone with his thoughts. He walked to the center of his cell and closed his eyes, letting his mind slip into the combat meditation techniques he had learned decades ago. Around him, the station's security systems hummed with electronic vigilance, their sensors detecting nothing more than a human sitting quietly in apparently harmless contemplation. They couldn't detect the careful mental mapping Kane was conducting, his consciousness extending beyond the cell to touch every system around him. They couldn't sense him memorizing guard patterns, identifying structural weaknesses, and calculating strike zones with the precision of a master craftsman planning his greatest work. Word of Kane's message reached Velthar within the hour, and the Grand Inquisitor smiled with anticipation. Finally, the legendary human was ready to break. Fear for the innocent would accomplish what years of searching could not: the complete intelligence files on human resistance networks. Velthar had no way of knowing that David Kane had never broken before, not even under the worst tortures the consortium could devise. And he certainly didn't understand that threatening innocence wouldn't break the Reaper. It would simply set him free. In his cell, Kane opened his eyes and looked directly into the surveillance camera. The technician monitoring that feed later swore that for just a moment, he felt as if something vast and terrible was looking back at him through the screen. The galaxy's most dangerous human had spent 5 years learning to be a better person. In a few hours, the consortium was about to learn why that made him infinitely more dangerous than the killer he used to be. Grand Inquisitor Velthar was about to discover that there were fates worse than death, and David Kane knew exactly how to deliver them. Grand Inquisitor Velthar entered the interrogation chamber with the confidence of someone who had broken thousands of minds over his long career. The room was a masterpiece of psychological intimidation: stark walls, harsh lighting, and restraint systems that could hold even the strongest beings. Psychic amplifiers built into the structure would boost his natural abilities to overwhelming levels. David Kane sat calmly in the restraint chair, his wrists secured by quantum-locked shackles that could hold a rampaging Bruthan. He watched Velthar with the same polite interest he might show a museum curator explaining an exhibit. "The infamous Reaper," Velthar said, his voice carrying the harmonics that made his species natural interrogators. "Do you know how many years I have waited for this moment?" Kane tilted his head slightly. "I would guess approximately 7 years, 4 months, since the Battle of Kepler Ridge where I killed your protege, Inquisitor Nexaval. You've been hunting me personally ever since." Velthar's 4 eyes widened. The death of Nexaval was classified information, known only to the highest levels of Consortium command. "Impressive. Your intelligence network was always thorough." "I didn't need a network for that," Kane replied. "You wear his ceremonial blade on your belt. Nexarian tradition dictates that only the mentor may carry the weapon of a fallen student. The blade is 300 years old, forged on your homeworld's northern continent, and it belonged to Nexaval's family for 6 generations before he claimed it." The Grand Inquisitor touched the weapon unconsciously. "You studied us." "I studied everything. Your people, your customs, your weaknesses. Knowledge is the only weapon that never jams, never runs out of ammunition, and can't be taken away." Kane's expression remained pleasant, conversational. "For instance, I know that you've enhanced your psychic abilities with cybernetic implants. The scarring pattern around your temple indicates Vorthan technology, specifically their Mark 7 neural interface." Velthar felt the first stirring of unease. Humans weren't supposed to possess this level of tactical intelligence about consortium species. "Enough games. You requested this meeting to negotiate. I am here to accept your surrender of information regarding human resistance networks." Kane laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "I requested this meeting to give you one chance to release the innocent people you've captured. Take your military prisoners if you must, but let the families go. You have what you really wanted: me. Unacceptable. These humans violated consortium space. They will be processed according to standard protocols." Velthar activated his psychic amplifiers, feeling power flow through his enhanced mind. "However, I am willing to make their deaths quick if you cooperate fully." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Kane's polite expression never changed, but something fundamental shifted in his posture. Velthar, despite his psychic abilities, couldn't identify what had changed, only that the human in front of him suddenly seemed far more dangerous than the restraints should have allowed. "That's unfortunate," Kane said softly. "I was hoping you'd be reasonable." Velthar launched his first psychic probe, a mental assault designed to shatter resistance and lay bare the subject's memories. The technique had never failed him, even against species with natural psychic defenses. The probe struck Kane's mind and simply stopped. Not blocked or deflected, but absorbed, like a stone dropped into perfectly still water. Velthar increased power, focusing the full strength of his enhanced abilities on breaking through whatever defense the human possessed. Kane smiled. Vorthan Mark 7 interfaces have a fascinating vulnerability. The neural pathways they create to enhance psychic abilities also work in reverse. Did you know that? Confusion flickered across Velthar's features as he felt something impossible happening. The human's mind, instead of being invaded, was somehow reaching back along the psychic connection. Kane's consciousness touched the cybernetic implants in Velthar's brain with surgical precision. "Human minds develop differently from yours," Kane continued, his voice taking on the tone of a professor delivering a lecture. We had to evolve defenses against our own predators, including each other, psychological warfare, manipulation, the ability to turn an opponent's strengths against them. You've spent so long conquering species that submit to psychic dominance that you've forgotten how to fight one that doesn't. Velthar tried to sever the connection, but the quantum-locked restraints that held Kane's body were doing nothing to contain his mind. The human had somehow weaponized the interrogation chamber's own systems, using the psychic amplifiers to boost his own abilities rather than Velthar's. "The beautiful thing about Vorthan technology," Kane said, his voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere as his consciousness flooded through the station's neural networks, is that it was designed to interface with organic minds. But the designers never considered what might happen if that organic mind refused to play by the rules. Throughout Nexus Prime, security systems began experiencing cascading failures. Cameras showed empty corridors where guards should have been standing. Cell locks disengaged with soft electronic chirps. Gravity generators cycled through random settings, creating pockets of weightlessness and areas of crushing force. In the general population cells, Captain Sarah Chen felt her cell door slide open with a quiet hiss. She stepped cautiously into the corridor, expecting alarms or guard response. Instead, she found other prisoners emerging from their own cells, looking around in confusion and growing hope. "How is this possible?" whispered Dr. Vasquez. Sarah looked toward the maximum security section, where she could see flashing emergency lights through the reinforced windows. "The Reaper," she said with certainty. "He's keeping his promise." In the interrogation chamber, Velthar was experiencing the unique horror of having his own enhanced mind turned against him. Kane's consciousness moved through the cybernetic pathways, like water finding every crack in a dam. The Grand Inquisitor felt his carefully constructed mental defenses crumbling one by one. "You want intelligence about human resistance networks?" Kane asked, his physical body still calmly seated in the restraint chair while his mind systematically dismantled Nexus Prime's security systems. "Let me give you something better. Let me show you why the Consortium will never truly defeat humanity." Images flooded Velthar's mind. Not memories of human military capabilities or hidden bases, but something far more dangerous. Kane shared the experience of 5 years living among refugees. Seeing the quiet dignity of people who had lost everything but refused to surrender hope. Children teaching each other to read in hidden schools. Families sharing their last rations with strangers. Communities rebuilding after devastating attacks, stronger than before. "You see humans as a military problem to be solved," Kane said. "But we're not an army you can defeat or a territory you can conquer. We're an idea. The idea that sentient beings have the right to determine their own fate. That idea doesn't need weapons or ships or advanced technology. It just needs people willing to carry it forward." Velthar tried desperately to resist, but Kane's assault was unlike anything in his experience. This wasn't brute force psychic domination. It was surgery performed with a scalpel made of pure thought. The human was selectively destroying specific neural pathways while leaving others intact, creating a precise pattern of mental damage. "What are you doing to me?" Velthar gasped. Kane's physical eyes opened, looking directly at the Grand Inquisitor with something that might have been pity. "I'm giving you a gift. The ability to feel empathy. Your species lost that capacity when they embraced the Consortium's ideology of domination. But the neural structures are still there, just suppressed by conditioning and cybernetic modification." Throughout the station, chaos reigned as Kane's consciousness moved like a virus through every system. Security doors opened to release prisoners while simultaneously sealing off routes that guards might use to respond. Life support systems rerouted atmosphere from empty areas to create breathable zones for escaping humans. Emergency protocols activated in precise sequence, creating confusion among the alien staff. Warden Carthex stood in his command center, watching his impregnable fortress dissolve into madness around him. "How is one human doing this?" he roared at his technical staff. Colonel Hicksmar was frantically trying to establish communication with his security teams. "Sir, we've lost contact with most of our guard posts. The few units still responding report that their equipment is malfunctioning. Weapons won't fire, armor systems are shutting down, and communication gear is producing nothing but static." "Then activate the station's self-destruct protocol. If we cannot contain the prisoner, we'll eliminate him along with the entire facility." Hicksmar's claws danced over his control console, entering the necessary authorization codes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen displayed a message in perfect Zephyrian script. "Self-destruct protocols have been temporarily suspended for routine maintenance. Thank you for your patience. Management." In the interrogation chamber, Kane stood up from the restraint chair, the quantum locks falling away like broken toys. Velthar lay unconscious on the floor, his mind overwhelmed by the sudden restoration of emotional capacity. The neural modifications that had made him an efficient torturer were now forcing him to experience every moment of pain he had ever inflicted on others. Kane looked down at the Grand Inquisitor with genuine sadness. "I told you there were fates worse than death. Living with a conscience after a lifetime of atrocity is one of them. But it's also the only path to redemption." He turned and walked toward the chamber's exit, where the security door had conveniently opened. Behind him, emergency medical teams would eventually find Velthar and discover that while his body was unharmed, his mind had been fundamentally rewired. The Grand Inquisitor would spend the rest of his life trying to make amends for crimes he could finally understand the true weight of. Kane stepped into the corridor and began walking toward the docking bays, where confused alien security forces were struggling to understand why their most secure prisoner was strolling freely through their station. They would figure it out soon enough, but by then, David Kane would be gone, along with every innocent human soul aboard Nexus Prime. The Reaper had awakened from his long sleep, and the galaxy was about to remember why humanity's greatest strength had never been their weapons or their ships. It was their refusal to accept that any cage could hold them forever. Captain Sarah Chen couldn't believe what she was seeing as she led a group of freed prisoners through Nexus Prime's corridors. Every security checkpoint they approached simply opened before them, as if the station itself was helping their escape. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls, but somehow the path forward always remained clear. "This way," called Dr. Vasquez from ahead, following directional arrows that had mysteriously appeared on the corridor displays. "The signs are pointing toward Docking Bay 7. Behind them, they could hear the confused shouts of consortium guards trying to restore order to their compromised facility. But every time security forces moved to intercept the escaping prisoners, their equipment would malfunction. Elevators would stop between floors, or blast doors would seal shut, trapping them in place. Thomas Chen carried his daughter Lucy, who had barely spoken since Velthar's torture session. His wife Maria walked beside him, her face pale but determined. "How is this happening, Sarah?" Thomas asked. "How is one man doing all of this?" Sarah glanced back toward the maximum security section, where explosions of sparks could be seen through reinforced windows as systems continued to fail. "Because he's not just a man anymore," she said quietly. "He's become something the consortium never prepared for, a human who learned to fight with more than just weapons." In the station's command center, Warden Carthex was living through his worst nightmare. Half his security teams were trapped in malfunctioning elevators, the other half were dealing with equipment failures that seemed to spread like a plague. His technical staff could only watch helplessly as the station's computer systems rewrote themselves in real time. "Sir, we have a priority transmission from Consortium High Command," reported Communication Officer Thekvas, her voice tight with stress. The holographic image of Admiral Krexthor materialized above the command table, the Bruthan's scarred features twisted with fury. Warden, explain to me how you have lost control of the most secure facility in Consortium space. Admiral, the human prisoner has somehow compromised our entire system. Our experts believe he's using some form of advanced neural interface technology. The human is using our own psychic interrogation chamber against us, interrupted a new voice. All eyes turned as David Kane stepped calmly into the command center, apparently having walked through sealed blast doors that should have been impossible to breach. The security guards in the room reached for their weapons, only to find their sidearms completely unresponsive. Kane ignored them completely, focusing his attention on Admiral Krexthor's hologram. Admiral, Kane said politely, as if meeting at a diplomatic reception, I believe we need to discuss terms. Krexthor's massive frame trembled with rage. You dare! I dare, because I'm holding all the cards, Kane interrupted, his voice still perfectly calm. Your station's defense systems are under my control. Your fleet assets in this system have mysteriously developed navigation errors that will keep them occupied for several hours. And I have something you want very badly. Information about human military capabilities that could change the course of this war. Warden Carthex stepped forward, his scales rattling with nervous energy. What do you want, human? Kane gestured toward the viewports, where the lights of refugee ships could be seen departing the station's docking bays. Safe passage for every non-military prisoner aboard this station. Transport ships to take them beyond Consortium space. And a guarantee that civilian refugee convoys will no longer be targeted for capture. Impossible, Admiral Krexthor snarled. The Consortium does not negotiate with terrorists. Kane tilted his head thoughtfully. Then perhaps the Consortium would prefer to explain to its member worlds why their most secure facility was completely compromised by a single human using nothing but his mind. He gestured to the chaos visible through the command center's windows. How long do you think your alliance will hold together when they realize that your technological superiority is an illusion? The truth of that statement hung heavy in the air. The Consortium's power rested on the belief that their advanced civilizations were inherently superior to younger species like humanity. If one human could cripple their greatest fortress using their own technology against them, what did that say about their supposed dominance? What information could you possibly offer that would be worth such terms? Krexthor demanded. Kane walked to the command center's main display and placed his hand on the interface. Instantly, star charts appeared showing human military positions throughout the galaxy, fleet deployments, hidden bases, supply routes, and strategic plans that represented years of intelligence gathering. Everything, Kane said simply. Complete tactical intelligence on human resistance operations, the locations of every hidden colony, every weapons cache, every escape route. The kind of information that could end this war in the Consortium's favor within 6 months. The command staff stared at the data in amazement. It was intelligence beyond their wildest dreams, the complete picture of human military capability that had eluded them for decades. With this information, they could crush the resistance once and for all. But Admiral Krexthor was more experienced than his subordinates. You would betray your own species? Kane's expression grew sad. My species is dying, Admiral. Every day this war continues, more human civilians suffer and die. Children starve on refugee ships, families are torn apart, entire colonies are reduced to ash. I've spent 5 years watching good people pay the price for a conflict they never wanted. He turned to face the hologram directly. But I've also learned something during those 5 years. Humans are survivors. Even if you crush every military installation, destroy every ship, and hunt down every soldier, we'll endure. Because we carry something you can't destroy with weapons. Hope. You're offering to surrender in exchange for the lives of refugees, Admiral Krexthor said. beginning to understand. "I'm offering to end this war before it destroys us all," Kane corrected. "Because I've seen the classified reports, Admiral. I know what's coming from beyond the galactic rim. The devourers that your own scientists detected 3 years ago. The consortium is going to need every ship, every soldier, every world united against that threat. You can't afford to waste resources hunting humans when extinction is heading straight for all of us." The silence in the command center was deafening. The devourer threat was classified at the highest possible levels, known only to the consortium's supreme leadership. But Kane spoke of it casually, as if it were common knowledge. "How do you know about the devourers?" Krexthor asked quietly. Kane smiled, and for the first time there was something genuinely warm in his expression. "Because humans have been monitoring deep space for signs of exactly this kind of threat for over a century. We detected them 18 months before your best sensors picked up their approach. The question is, do you want to face them with humanity as your enemy or as your ally?" Through the command center's viewports, the last refugee ships were departing the station, carrying their human cargo toward freedom. Kane watched them go with satisfaction, knowing that whatever happened next, those innocent people would have a chance at life. "Your terms are accepted," Admiral Krexthor said finally. "The civilian prisoners will be allowed to depart unmolested. In exchange, you will provide complete intelligence on human military operations and submit yourself for permanent custody." Kane nodded and began transferring data through the station's computers, fulfilling his part of the bargain. Fleet positions, supply caches, command structures, everything the consortium needed to locate and destroy human military resistance. But as the final files transferred, Kane added one more piece of information that wasn't part of the original deal. Buried in the intelligence data was a complete analysis of consortium military capabilities, including detailed vulnerability assessments for every major ship class and strategic installation. The same information that would allow them to crush human resistance could also be used by humans to strike devastating blows against consortium forces. It was, Kane realized, exactly the kind of gift that David Kane, the Reaper, might leave behind, a weapon disguised as surrender. Warden Carthex ordered his guards to place Kane in new restraints, but the human held up a hand to stop them. "One more thing, Admiral. The devourers will arrive in approximately 14 months. When they do, you're going to need every advantage you can get. Look for a signal from the human colony at New Terra. 3 short pulses, 3 long, 3 short. When you receive it, you'll know we're ready to fight beside you instead of against you." As the guards led Kane away to a new cell, one that would hopefully prove more secure than the last, Admiral Krexthor studied the intelligence data scrolling across his screens. Victory over the human resistance was now within reach, but the cost of that victory had been measured in terms he hadn't expected. In the depths of space, the refugee ships from Nexus Prime set course for the edges of consortium territory, carrying hundreds of human families toward uncertain but hopeful futures. They would spread the word of what had happened, how the Reaper had sacrificed himself to save innocence, how one human had brought the galaxy's mightiest fortress to its knees using nothing but his mind. The story would grow in the telling, becoming legend among the scattered human communities throughout the galaxy. Children would hear tales of the man who walked through locked doors, who turned the enemy's weapons against them, who proved that no cage could hold the human spirit. And in 14 months, when alien darkness fell upon the galaxy from beyond the rim, humanity would be ready. Not as broken refugees hiding in the shadows, but as free people choosing to stand and fight for something greater than themselves. David Kane, the Reaper, had given them that choice. He had traded his freedom for theirs, his legend for their future. It was perhaps the most human thing anyone had ever done, sacrificing everything to give others hope. The galaxy would remember his name not as a killer, but as the man who reminded every sentient being that some things were worth dying for. And in the end, that made all the difference.